The chapter calls Amy and Joe go for a series of social calls, which were part of women's role of the time. Joe despises these calls like she despises most of the female labor of the time. Joe tries to avoid speaking with the ladies, and more than once she runs out to play with the boys. Amy loves Joe, but she is hurt because Joe is making fun of something that is important to her. Joe doesn't take any of these calls seriously, and her own insecurities also bring out her temper. When they go to visit Aunt March and Aunt Carol, Jo dismisses them and puts herself above them. At the same time, Aunt Carol is wondering which girl gets to go to Europe, and Amy makes a better impression. Calls has never been adapted into movies, probably because it shows Jo in a bad light. Yet it would be important to adapt it because it does not only show how much Amy has matured, but also how the conversations between Jo and Amy are more respectful, even if they would disagree. The 1994 film does not have any scenes from the calls, and the viewer doesn't get any explanation why Jo was not chosen. The 1994 film also frames it to happen right after Jo has rejected Laurie's proposal, which in the book happens much later on. In the novel, Jo is very mad and jealous to Amy when she hears that she has not been chosen. She is way more mad at herself, but she doesn't want to admit it. This also parallels Jo's and Laurie's tempers because neither one of them like to admit if their own actions hurt other people and rather put the blame on someone else. In the 2019 film, we once again do not see Jo putting herself above the aunts and losing the trip to Europe. Instead, we only see Meryl Streep telling Jo that she is not coming. Film also tries to pinpoint Jo's and Aunt March's similarities by pointing out Aunt March as a happy spinster who only cares about money, when in the novel Aunt March is a widow and sad and unhappy because she had lost her child and her husband who she dearly loved. In the book, Amy feels terrible for getting something that Jo so badly wanted, and Jo did not want to show her own disappointment but to be sportive, which is a proof of sisterly love. Amy matured a great deal when she was in Europe. She became more graceful and more serious. Amy also loved Aunt March more than anyone else in the family and truly enjoyed the company of her aunt. There are lots of things I could say about Jo losing her trip to Europe and people blaming that on Amy. Once again, that entire narrative is entirely constructed by the filmmakers. An adult woman should not play a 12-year-old. In an earlier script of Greta Gerwig's film, after Jo found out about Amy's and Laurie's engagement, she wanted to punch Amy. This diverges too much from the novel. Even when the writers say they want to do a good job with Laurie and Amy, they can't seem to escape their Jo and Laurie obsession. Book Jo never likes Laurie romantically. This triangle is repeated in all adaptations because we don't see Laurie's character arc. We fail to understand why Jo rejects him. In the 2017 series, Jo became really cross when she found out about Amy's and Laurie's engagement. The 2018 film is probably the only one that shows that Laurie is clearly more of a brother to Jo. And yet, there is a scene where Jo says to Beth that Amy stole Laurie from her. None of this is in the novel. The whole reason why Jo traveled to New York was because Laurie was harassing her, and she was actually scared to spend time with him alone. In the novel, even before Jo finds out that Amy and Laurie were engaged, she says to Mommy that she thinks Amy and Laurie would be a good couple. Why this has not been adapted? Louisa partially based Laurie's character to her Polish friend Ladislas Wisniewski. They met in Switzerland in 1865 when Louisa was working there, and Ladislas was quite flirtatious with Louisa. So he was 21 at the time and Louisa was about 32. A year later, May Alcott lived in Paris at the same time with Ladislas. This has made many Alcott scholars believe that there was some sort of rivalry between the sisters about this young man, but the letters between Louisa and May show that they both became quite tired with him. They call him boring and say that he does not take his life or work very seriously. Julian Hawthorne was the next-door neighbor of the Alcotts. It seems that he had a crush on May, but May was 6 years older than Julian, so she probably did not feel the same about him. After the publication of Little Woman, Julian apparently spread a rumor that he had been the model for Laurie. However, this is not something that Louisa ever confirmed. Julian was not very interested in school or work, and he came from a rather comfortable family setting, like Laurie, and may have tried to encourage him to study and make his family proud. Alf Whitman was one of the real-life Lauries as well, and friend of the Alcott sisters. Alf was 5 years younger than Louisa, but only 2 years younger than May. Alf and May were very close, and when May moved to Europe, they continued writing letters to one another. But when Alf was younger, and the sisters connected with him through their theater hobby, young Alf was drifting and quite lost with his future plans, and both May and Louisa tried to encourage him to study and become more productive.
Hello, friends. It is Niina from the Little Woman podcast. Just to let you all know that the Little Woman podcast episode transcripts are now available as books. You can find them as paperbacks and ebooks. They are wonderful reading for all the fans of Louisa May Alcott. You can find all the links from the description. And now, back to the show.
Which is also something that happens in Little Woman. And Alf being Laurie's model is something that Louisa has confirmed. In the novel, Laurie is not a prize that the two sisters are fighting over. In the novel, both Amy and Joe are frustrated that he is wasting his life away. He only goes to school to please his grandfather, and he does not want to work. There is literally a chapter in the novel called Lazy Lawrence. Both Amy and Joe are working-class girls, and Laurie is rich. And in the novel, there are scenes where he says that he does not understand why Jo wants to write and why it is so important for her to make her own money. No matter how hard Jo tries, she can't get through Laurie, probably because Jo's relationship to Laurie was very maternal. Jo wanted to go to university, and Laurie took his education for granted. All the real-life people who were models for Friedrich's character were one way or another connected to education, or the academic world, and literature. Louisa herself was an advocate for female education, and in her journals from the time when Louisa was in her 20s, she wrote about her future wishes of starting a school and possibly running that together with Henry Thoreau. Then we have all these real-life Lauries who I believe were smart young men, but for some reason were not interested working or studying. Some of them, like Alf, did decide to be a useful member of society and made the sisters proud. In the novel, Laurie is not stupid. It is mentioned that he graduates with honors in Latin, and Amy is especially proud of him, but he is lazy. Do you think Jo would despise me as you do? Yes, if she saw you now. She hates lazy people. Why don't you do something splendid and make her love you? I did my best, but it was no use. Graduating well, you mean? That was no more than you ought to have done, for your grandfather's sake. It would have been shameful to fail after spending so much time and money, and everyone knew you could do well. This scene reveals that Laurie did not go to university for the sake of studying. The book also describes how in the university Laurie is a party boy, and he flirts and gets into troubles. In Little Woman, even though Amy is 4 years younger than Laurie, she is a lot more mature than he is, and it is only thanks to Amy Laurie puts his act together. The 2019 film includes Laurie saying Amy that she should not marry Fred for the sake of money, but the film does not show Laurie doing any work for Amy. Laurie doesn't have any kind of growth process in the movie. In one of her interviews, Greta Gerwig said that Laurie wants Jo to step into the world of adulthood. What is the book that she has read? Laurie in the book is the one character who does not want to grow, and the only reason he wants to marry Jo is that he wouldn't need to take any responsibility on his life. This is what Laurie says in the book, after he has fully internalized everything that Amy has said to him. She's right. Talent isn't genius, and you can make it so. That music has taken the vanity out of me, as Rome take it out of her, and I won't be a humbug any longer. Now, what shall I do? Some readers have struggled reading the part 2 because it portrays Jo in slightly less favorable light than in the part 1. Jo has a heavy masculine trajectory. In part 1, she and Laurie are brothers. Jo wishes that she could be a soldier and fight in the war like her father. If a reader reads too much to Jo, they see Amy as an annoying little sister because that's how Jo sees her. In part 2, it is now Jo who struggles to fit into the surrounding society. Amy, who has more feminine trajectory, is better accepted to the conquered society. When Jo was still living at home, it was okay for her to behave like a boy, and family didn't see too much harm in it. But when she grows, this old model of masculinity does not suit her any longer, and neither she wants to conform to the traditional female role. When Laurie proposes to Jo, he expects her to give up writing and become a socialite, and be something that she wasn't. This is why Friedrich's character is important, because he does not ask or want Jo to conform. Because Jo looks very different and more masculine than other women, she felt she could not find anyone to love. If I quote my podcaster pal Emily, Little Woman as a book was also written to offer hope to those who feel that they are never going to find love or are not worth of loving. Amy sees the value of the feminine work, good societal status, and all the wonderful things that prosper when you know how to make the best of it. Losing the trip to Europe became the first step in the terms of Jo's feminist awakening. Jo realizes that her temper is out of control and the ideas of masculinity that she has been admiring are not working. In the first part of the novel, Jo had difficulties to identify with Meg's pain when Laurie forged letters in the name of his tutor. In the beginning of the second book, when Jo becomes the target of Laurie's unwanted attention, it is now that she begins to understand what it feels like when someone does not respect your boundaries. This is repeated in the fourth book, Jo's Boys, when Jo is in her 50s and on a full feminist mode. She scolds some of the young male students who treat girls like objects. In Jo's Boys, the character of Nan and Tommy Banks also echo Jo and Laurie. Nan studies to become a doctor and Tommy is studying medicine, but he isn't that interested from it. He has ulterior motives. Jo is really annoyed by Tommy's behavior, so when Tommy unexpectedly falls in love with someone completely different, Jo is very pleased and Nan is also relieved. From Amy, Jo learns to value the feminine labor and not to underestimate women. Taking care of Beth brings out the nurturing side of her, and it also makes her to examine her own life in a new light, and losing Beth beautifies the domestic tasks. From Meg, Jo learns that equally respectful relationship can be worth of pursuing. Jo struggles to fit into the traditional feminine role. Friedrich does not fit into the traditional masculine role, but he doesn't struggle with it. He is comfortable of being who he is. His intellectualism and philosophical background complements Jo's feminist views. Amy's desire to improve herself already exists in the first novel, when she doesn't want to wear the ring Aunt Marge has given to her, and when Marmee asks why, Amy says it is going to be a reminder for her not to be too selfish. What is also interesting is that in the first part of Little Woman, Laurie puts himself above Meg and Jo, but he does not put himself above Amy. For example, when Amy is writing her will, Laurie does not dismiss or scoff her, but instead is very supportive and sweet to her. The problem with Hollywood turning Laurie into the perfect boy next door is that in the minds of many that turns him into an award for the sisters to fight over, meant that is not part of the book's narrative. Amy is also a feminist, but it is not straight-to-your-face feminism to which Jo's feminism eventually develops. For example, Amy plans to open a charity that would help women to break into the male-dominated art market. Both Amy and Jo were raised in the same politically aware home, and both were encouraged to think outside the box. Thank you so much for listening. Take care and make good choices. Bye.